The plane was soaring high above the clouds, cutting through the sky with a gentle hum. Passengers in first class were comfortably settled, sipping champagne and chatting quietly. Among them was a woman, calm and composed, seated by the window with a book in her lap. Her name was Amara Steele, a name that most people wouldn't recognize at first glance, but those who did knew her as one of the richest women in the world. She owned everything from tech companies to entire fleets of planes. Amara was dressed in a simple yet elegant dress, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She wasn't a woman who drew attention, but today she didn't need to. It was the kind of flight where everything seemed peaceful. But peace was fragile, and today, that peace was about to be shattered. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah, moved quickly down the aisle. She smiled at passengers, her service efficient but cold. She had a long day ahead and didn't care much about the faces she saw. But when her eyes landed on Amara, something stirred. She noticed the calmness in Amara's posture, the way she seemed untouchable. She didn't know who Amara was, but it annoyed her. She had seen people like her before, people who thought they were above the rules. Amara raised her hand and caught Sarah's attention, asking, "Could I please have some water?" Sarah's smile faded for a moment, and she looked down at Amara's simple request. "Water?" Sarah asked, her voice flat. "I guess so." There was an edge to Sarah's tone that went unnoticed by most. She wasn't used to being asked for things by people like Amara. She walked away without another word. Amara didn't mind. She had dealt with worse, after all. But as Sarah moved further down the aisle, Amara felt something shift in the air. Sarah's attitude, a subtle arrogance, seemed to grow. When she returned to Amara's seat, she didn't offer the water with a smile. Instead, she placed the cup down a little too forcefully, spilling a tiny bit onto the tray. "Oops," Sarah muttered. "You can clean that up." Amara blinked, taken aback. She had no idea why Sarah was acting like this. She'd asked for water, not a scene. "I'm sorry," Amara said calmly, wiping the spill away with a napkin. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "Yeah, well, maybe you should think before you speak," Sarah snapped, not bothering to hide her irritation. The passengers in the rows around them looked away, not wanting to get involved. It was a small exchange, barely noticed by anyone else. But for Amara, it was a glimpse into something she'd seen before: unnecessary rudeness. Still, she remained quiet, knowing that sometimes the best response was no response at all. But Sarah wasn't finished. A few minutes later, she returned again, her face flushed with irritation. There was no clear reason for it, but she had decided that something needed to happen. Amara had already brushed her off once, and that simply couldn't stand. "What did you say to me earlier?" Sarah demanded, her voice louder this time. "You think you can just—" Without warning, Sarah reached out and slapped Amara across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the cabin, sharp and sudden. The entire plane went silent. Amara froze. The sting of the slap wasn't what shocked her. It was the fact that someone, anyone, could have the nerve to do this in a place so public. She glanced around the cabin. Everyone was staring at her, waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah stood there, her hand still outstretched, eyes wide with surprise. She hadn't expected Amara to stay silent. Most people would have cried out, shouted for help. But Amara simply touched her cheek, where a small red mark began to form. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Amara's eyes locked with Sarah's, calm but piercing. "You've made a mistake," she said quietly, her voice steady. Sarah blinked, confused. "What?" "I'm not who you think I am," Amara continued, standing up slowly. She could feel the weight of the situation shift, the tension in the air growing thicker. "And you've just made the biggest mistake of your life." The passengers watched, unsure of what was happening. Some wondered if Amara was going to make a scene, but others sensed that she wasn't angry. She wasn't even upset. She was just calm. the kind of calm that made people uncomfortable. Without another word, Amara pulled out her phone from her bag, typing something quickly on the screen. Then, in a voice that cut through the silence, she said, "Prepare my legal team. We have a situation." The words hung in the air as Sarah stood frozen, her heart racing. She had no idea who she had just slapped, but she was about to find out. As Amara sat back down, she glanced out the window, as though the whole incident was nothing more than a passing cloud. The other passengers started murmuring, unsure of what to make of it. They didn't know it yet, but this moment would change everything. The flight attendant had just slapped the wrong woman. The silence on the plane was almost unbearable. It felt as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The flight attendant, Sarah, stood frozen in the aisle, her hand still trembling from the slap she had just delivered. The passengers around her whispered amongst themselves, their eyes darting nervously toward the woman who had been slapped. Amara Steele, the woman in question, had settled back into her seat, her expression calm, almost serene. She wasn't looking at Sarah, but rather out the window, as though the entire incident hadn't just occurred. The passengers in first class watched her, their curiosity building. Who was this woman? One man, sitting 2 rows behind Amara, couldn't contain his thoughts any longer. Did she just slap her? He whispered to his wife, who nodded, wide-eyed. "I think she did. But that woman, she's just sitting there, not even reacting." Another passenger, a middle-aged woman with dark glasses, leaned over to her companion. "I think I've seen her before. I swear I've read about her. Amara Steele, right? The billionaire who owns half of Silicon Valley." The man beside her raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Amara Steele, the tech mogul, the one who created global networks and owns half of this airline. "Yes, that's her," the woman replied in a hushed tone, glancing nervously at Amara. "She's one of the richest women in the world." The words hung in the air, passing from one passenger to the next. A ripple of shock and recognition spread throughout the cabin. As more and more people realized who Amara was, she wasn't just any ordinary passenger. She was a billionaire, someone with enough power and influence to change the course of industries with a single decision. The atmosphere shifted. No one was sure what would happen next, but they all knew they were witnesses to something bigger than a simple flight. As the whispers grew louder, Sarah, the flight attendant, stood off to the side, her face pale. She didn't know who Amara Steele was when she first slapped her. But now, with everyone talking about her, she felt the weight of her mistake crashing down on her. Her heart pounded in her chest. She looked over at the other crew members who had gathered near the galley. The head flight attendant, a woman named Claire, was speaking in low tones, her expression serious. Sarah knew it was only a matter of time before the situation would be taken to the next level. "I don't know how to fix this," Sarah whispered, looking down at her shoes. Claire gave her a stern look. "You've already made it worse. Now we have to deal with the fallout." "But she's a billionaire. What am I supposed to do?" Sarah's voice wavered with panic. "I don't know," Claire replied, rubbing her temples. "But this is bigger than you. We'll have to alert corporate, and the captain needs to be involved. We're going to have to answer for this." In the meantime, Amara sat back in her seat, unfazed by the commotion happening around her. She was no stranger to people making assumptions about her, and she had learned long ago that it was best to remain composed. But this time was different. She wasn't just another wealthy woman who could be dismissed. She had built her empire from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let anyone walk over her, especially not over something as petty as a slap. Amara pulled out her phone again and began typing a message. She didn't have to explain herself to anyone. She had all the resources she needed to handle this. The legal team she referred to was just one part of her extensive network, a team ready to protect her at a moment's notice. The wheels of power were already in motion. "What are you going to do?" a voice asked, and Amara turned to find the businessman who had spoken earlier. He was sitting in the seat across the aisle from her, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Amara gave him a small smile. "I'm going to let the world know the truth." The businessman raised an eyebrow. "The truth? You mean about who you are?" She nodded, her voice steady. "About how people like her see people like me. It's not just about wealth or power. It's about respect. And when people forget that, they need to learn the hard way." He nodded, understanding her point. "I didn't know who you were at first. But I can see now. This is bigger than just an apology from her." Amara didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. The passengers around her were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. They had all witnessed something that they wouldn't soon forget, a moment that would become a part of the larger story of how power and respect were not always as they seemed. As the plane continued its journey through the skies, Sarah remained on edge. She knew that when they landed, everything would change. She would have to face the consequences of her actions, but she wasn't ready for what awaited her. Sarah didn't know what she expected, but hearing Claire's words made everything feel real. She was in over her head, and there was no way to undo what had already happened. The rest of the descent was a blur. Sarah could barely focus on her duties as the plane neared the runway. She watched as the captain made his final announcements, and the seatbelt sign was illuminated. Her mind kept drifting back to Amara, the calm woman who had been slapped, and now the whispers of who she really was. As the plane landed and taxied toward the terminal, Sarah's heart raced even faster. She could already see the crew members waiting by the gate. They were there for a reason, and Sarah didn't need to guess why. She could feel the cold stares of the passengers as they filed off the plane. Some had no idea about Amara's identity, but others, the ones who had recognized her, walked past with a mixture of awe and fear in their eyes. Amara Steele was a force to be reckoned with, and Sarah had just made her a target. When the plane finally came to a complete stop, Claire motioned for Sarah to stay behind. She wasn't going anywhere until the situation had been dealt with. "Just stay calm," Claire whispered one last time. "I'll handle the rest." The door opened, and Amara Steele stood up, her bag in hand. The woman's calm demeanor hadn't changed, but Sarah could sense the power in the way she moved. Amara wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the storm that had arrived, and Sarah had no idea how bad the damage would be. As Amara walked toward the door, Sarah hesitated, her eyes fixed on her. But Amara didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge Sarah. She didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. But just as Amara reached the exit, she turned her head slightly and spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but it carried weight. "Enjoy the next few hours," she said. "You won't be enjoying anything after that." Amara stepped off the plane without looking back, and the door closed behind her with a soft click. The crew members standing by the gate exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no time for words. The storm had already begun. Sarah, standing frozen in the aisle, could feel it. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure: her life was about to change. The moment the plane touched down, it felt as though time had frozen. The buzz of the passengers disembarking filled the air, but Sarah stood at the back of the aircraft, her body still, her mind spinning. Every step that Amara had taken toward the door echoed in Sarah's mind. The billionaire hadn't turned back, hadn't said another word to her. Yet, the weight of her presence lingered like a storm cloud, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was about to unfold. The airport terminal was bustling with activity as passengers flooded out of the plane. Most of them seemed oblivious to what had transpired on board, but some of the more attentive passengers looked between each other, speaking in hushed tones. The news that Amara Steele had been slapped was already spreading. The whispers were turning into rumors, and soon it would reach the public. Sarah could only hope the damage wouldn't be too severe. But deep down, she knew that wasn't realistic. As the last of the passengers exited, Sarah followed Claire into a small, quiet room near the gate where airline staff met with arriving crews. It was here that the company would start its damage control. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as Claire shut the door behind them, cutting them off from the prying eyes of the airport. "We have to act fast," Claire said, her voice tight with tension. "Corporate is on their way. They want a full report on what happened. They've already spoken to Amara's legal team. They'll want answers." Sarah felt the lump form in her throat. She had no idea what the next few hours would bring, but she could already feel the weight of the consequences pressing down on her. She wanted to explain, to apologize, but the words felt useless now. She had made a mistake, and she couldn't take it back. "I didn't know who she was," Sarah said quietly, as if repeating the words over and over would make them more real, more understandable. Claire's face softened for a moment, but only for a second. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to stay calm. "I know you didn't, Sarah, but we have to be prepared. This is bigger than just a slap. This is a corporate nightmare. We need to work fast and make sure everything is covered." Sarah nodded, her hands still shaking. "What if she sues us? What if I lose my job?" "You might lose more than your job," Claire said, her voice low. "If Amara Steele decides to press charges, this could become a media frenzy. A billionaire suing an airline over something like this. It'll be everywhere. The company will need to protect its reputation. And unfortunately, they'll be looking for someone to take the fall." Sarah felt her stomach twist at the thought. She had no idea how this would end, but she could already feel the pressure building. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she hesitated before pulling it out. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name on the screen. Corporate headquarters. She glanced at Claire, who gave her a nod. "Answer it. But remember, stay calm." Taking the shaky breath, Sarah answered the call. "Hello," she said, trying to sound confident, but her voice wavered. "Sarah," came the voice on the other end of the line. It was a smooth, professional tone that didn't give away any emotion, but Sarah could feel the weight of the situation. "This is Victoria from the corporate office. We're aware of the situation, and we're already speaking with Ms. Steele's team. You need to prepare a full report of the events that took place on Flight 705. We need all the details. You'll be meeting with our legal team shortly." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "A report? I don't even know where to begin." "Just tell the truth, Sarah," Victoria replied calmly. "Tell us exactly what happened. Don't try to cover up anything. It's critical that we know everything, including any interactions you had with Miss Steele." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. "Okay, I'll be ready." "Good," Victoria said. "We'll be in touch soon." The line went dead, and Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her eyes met Claire's, who gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. "There's no easy way out of this," Claire said softly. "But the best we can do right now is face it head on." Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing with possibilities. What if Amara decided to make this a public spectacle? What if the press got involved? She couldn't escape the thought that her entire career could be on the line. As the minutes passed, the tension in the room grew. Finally, the door opened, and two corporate representatives stepped inside. They were both dressed sharply in business suits, their expressions serious. "We're here to handle this," one of them said, a man with dark hair and piercing eyes. "Ms. Steele's legal team is already waiting in a separate conference room. We'll meet with them shortly, but we need your statement first." The hours after the meeting with corporate felt like they dragged on endlessly. Sarah couldn't escape the gnawing feeling in her gut that things were spiraling out of control. She had done everything she could, given her statement, tried to remain calm. But deep down, she knew this was far from over. Amara Steele's influence was vast, and Sarah's small mistake seemed like a blip on the radar of her immense power. After the meeting with the corporate representatives, Claire pulled Sarah aside again, her face grave. "We've received word from Ms. Steele's team," Claire said quietly, her voice filled with both concern and caution. "She wants to meet with us." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected a personal meeting with Amara herself. Up until now, all the conversations had been filtered through layers of corporate staff, lawyers, and representatives. The fact that Amara wanted to meet in person was not just a sign of the severity of the situation, it was a direct message. "She wants to meet. With me?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Claire nodded. "Yes, she's made it clear that this is an important matter, and she wants to handle it personally. You'll be going to her office later today." The mention of Amara's office only made the gravity of the situation feel even heavier. Amara Steele wasn't just some wealthy individual. She was a billionaire, a woman with influence in ways Sarah couldn't even begin to understand. The idea of facing her felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that one wrong move could send everything crashing down. What do I even say to her?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "We don't have all the details yet," Claire said, her eyes soft with empathy. "But we'll be there to support you. Whatever happens, you need to remain composed. Just be honest and professional. That's all we can ask of you right now." The minutes felt like hours as Sarah prepared for the meeting. She found herself in front of a mirror, trying to steady her breath. But her mind kept racing. What did Amara want from her? Would she press charges? Would Sarah lose her job? Could the company recover from this? Every possible scenario ran through her head, but none of them seemed to offer any peace. Later that afternoon, Sarah, Claire, and a few other members of the corporate team were escorted into a sleek, high-rise building in the city, Amara Steele's headquarters. The lobby was everything Sarah had expected: modern, pristine, and polished to perfection. It felt like walking into another world, a world where mistakes were unforgivable, and only the powerful survived. They were led up to the top floor, where Amara's office awaited. The doors opened, and Sarah was greeted by the sight of a luxurious, minimalistic space. Large windows overlooked the city, the sun casting long shadows across the room. But it wasn't the decor that caught Sarah's attention. It was Amara herself. She stood near the window, her back to the group, dressed in a tailored black suit, her posture impeccable. Amara had an air of confidence that was impossible to ignore. She was a woman who knew her worth, and she wasn't afraid to make sure everyone else did too. When she turned around, her eyes locked onto Sarah's. There was no malice in her gaze, but there was a coldness, a professionalism that made Sarah feel smaller than she had ever felt in her life. "Sarah," Amara said, her voice smooth and controlled, "I assume you know why we're here." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the moment press down on her. "Yes, ma'am. I didn't mean for what happened to escalate. It was a mistake." Amara didn't immediately respond. Instead, she motioned for Sarah to sit at the table in the center of the room. Claire, who had been standing beside Sarah, took a seat at the opposite end of the table, watching the interaction closely. "I've heard the story from your airline," Amara began, her eyes never leaving Sarah's. "But I'd like to hear it from you. I want to know exactly what happened on that flight." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with tension. Sarah swallowed hard, her palms sweaty. She had prepared for this moment in her mind, but now that it was real, the words escaped her. I was wrong." Sarah started, her voice quiet but steady. "I acted without thinking. When I saw you in first class, I assumed you were someone else. I didn't realize who you were at the time." Amara raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "You assumed I was someone else, and that justifies slapping me." The days after the meeting with Amara Steele felt like an endless blur. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled deep in her stomach. She had thought that apologizing would be enough, but Amara's words haunted her. "You'll have to earn my forgiveness." What did that even mean? How could she possibly make things right when she didn't even fully understand the depth of her mistake? Sarah knew that Amara's world was one of immense power, wealth, and influence, and in that world, one small mistake could have devastating consequences. As the days passed, Sarah found herself waiting for a call from Amara's team. waiting for some kind of direction. Claire had given her no real details, only that Amara's people would reach out when they were ready. On the fourth day, Sarah's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but she knew immediately it had to be related to Amara. Her heart skipped a beat as she answered. "Hello, Sarah." It was a woman's voice, smooth and professional. "This is Natalie, Amara Steele's assistant. We have a task for you." Sarah's palms grew sweaty, her pulse racing. "A task? What do you mean?" "You'll need to meet with Amara's team tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Be prepared to spend the day with us. This will be your first test." The line went silent for a moment, and then Natalie's voice continued. "We need to know if you're truly willing to prove your worth." The words stung, but Sarah knew they weren't meant to hurt. This was just how Amara operated. Nothing was ever given easily, and everything had to be earned. "I understand," Sarah said, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. "I'll be there." The next morning, Sarah dressed carefully, her nerves running wild as she made her way to the address Natalie had given her. She had no idea what Amara's team would ask of her, but she couldn't afford to fail. This was her chance, her only chance, to make things right. She arrived at a sleek, modern office building, its glass exterior reflecting the sky like a mirror. Inside, everything was pristine, a reflection of Amara's meticulous nature. Natalie greeted her at the door, leading her into a conference room where a few other people were already waiting. They were all dressed sharply, their expressions unreadable. "Take a seat," Natalie instructed. "Amara will be here shortly." Sarah sat in the room, feeling a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Her mind raced with questions. What kind of test was she about to face? Would it involve more apologies? Would she have to prove her value to Amara in some grand way? She couldn't help but wonder if she was even capable of earning the billionaire's forgiveness. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Amara herself walked in, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, pausing when they landed on Sarah. Without a word, Amara took her seat at the head of the table, the other team members immediately falling into silence. "Good," Amara said, her voice cool but clear. "You're here. That's the first step." She gestured to the table in front of her. On it lay a series of documents, papers, and a tablet. Amara's team began to explain the task Sarah had been assigned, something that seemed as straightforward as it was challenging. "We need you to plan a charity event for our company," Amara said. "It's an annual event, and this year we're going bigger than ever before. You'll be working directly with our team to organize everything, from guest lists to logistics. It's going to be a lot of work." Sarah nodded, trying to keep her nerves under control. She had experience in event planning. But this was different. This was Amara Steele's event. It had to be perfect. "But here's the catch," Amara continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "The event will be entirely secret. We're testing how you handle high-pressure situations and your ability to keep things confidential. No one can know what's going on until the very last moment." The challenge was daunting, but it wasn't impossible. Sarah took a deep breath, pushing aside her self-doubt. If this was her chance to earn Amara's forgiveness, she would take it. "I understand," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'll do my best." Amara gave her a slight nod, as though satisfied with her response. "I expect results. No excuses." The meeting lasted for several hours, with Sarah being given a rundown of everything she needed to do. The event would be held in less than a month, and Sarah would need to coordinate everything. The venue, the guest list, the catering, the entertainment. Amara wanted it all to be flawless, and there could be no mistakes. As Sarah left the meeting, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. She knew this was her test, and failing wasn't an option. But as daunting as the task was, she also realized something. Amara had given her a chance to prove herself, to show that she could rise to the occasion, even if it meant stepping into a world far bigger than she ever imagined. The night before the event, Sarah stood in the venue, looking around at the stunning setup. It was everything Amara had asked for and more. The lights were perfect, the decorations were breathtaking, and every detail had been meticulously arranged. Yet, despite the flawless execution, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Tomorrow would be the day that could change everything for her, the day that could either lift her up or shatter her hopes of redemption. She knew the event wasn't just about the decorations or the guest list. It was about how she handled everything under pressure, how she kept everything secret, and most importantly, how she made Amara Steele feel. As Sarah walked through the venue, she couldn't help but remember the moment when Amara had given her this task. "You'll need to prove yourself," Amara had said. "This isn't just about planning a party. This is about you showing me who you really are. Do you have what it takes?" Tomorrow would be her answer. Sarah had barely left the venue when her phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. "Be at the venue by 8 a.m. sharp. Amara will be arriving with the guests. Everything must be perfect." Her hands trembled slightly as she typed a quick reply. "Understood." Then she put the phone away and focused on the task ahead. She went home, barely sleeping, her mind constantly running through the checklist in her head. It was like she was living in a dream. Tomorrow, she would face the culmination of everything. The stakes were high, and there was no room for failure. The morning came quickly, and Sarah arrived at the venue even earlier than requested, making sure every last detail was in place. The staff was already in position, the chefs were preparing the food, and the entertainers were getting ready backstage. Everything was set, but Sarah could feel her nerves bubbling up again. She had come so far, and now it was time to prove that she was worthy of Amara's forgiveness. By the time Amara arrived, the guests were starting to trickle in. The room was buzzing with excitement, but Sarah remained focused. She greeted Amara at the entrance with a steady smile, masking the anxiety that had settled deep inside her. Amara's sharp eyes scanned the room as she walked in, taking in the sight of the event. Her gaze briefly met Sarah's, and for a moment, it was as if time had frozen. There was no warm smile or praise, just a quick look that seemed to hold a lot of weight. Sarah didn't know if that look was good or bad, but she held her breath. "This is impressive," Amara said, her voice cold yet approving. "You've done well. Let's see how the night goes." As the evening unfolded, Sarah worked tirelessly behind the scenes, making sure everything went according to plan. The guests were enjoying themselves, the food was exceptional, and the entertainment was flawless. But despite the success of the event, Sarah couldn't help but feel a tinge of worry. Would this be enough to prove herself? Would Amara see her efforts as genuine? When it was finally time for Amara to give her speech, the room fell silent. Amara stepped onto the stage, the spotlight casting her in an almost regal light. She stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd, her presence commanding attention. Sarah stood at the back of the room, watching with bated breath. "Good evening, everyone," Amara began, her voice smooth and confident. "Tonight is about celebration, but also about gratitude. We are here to honor the power of hard work, dedication, and perseverance. But most of all, we are here to recognize the people who have earned their place in the world. And there is one person tonight who has earned a special place in my world." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was Amara talking about her? Amara paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. Then her gaze landed on Sarah. The entire room followed her gaze, and for a moment, the spotlight seemed to shift to Sarah, making her feel like the center of attention. "I want to thank Sarah," Amara said, her voice carrying across the room, "for taking responsibility for her actions, for doing more than just apologizing. She has proven to me that she is capable of far more than I ever expected. And for that, I am grateful." The room erupted into applause, and Sarah felt her face flush with warmth. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Amara Steele, one of the most powerful women in the world, was praising her, not just for the event, but for her growth and willingness to change. Amara's eyes never left Sarah as she continued, Tonight is proof that redemption is possible, but it doesn't come without effort. Sarah has proven that she has what it takes to rise above her mistakes. I trust her, and I hope all of you will as well. As the applause continued, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a deep sense of pride. She had done it. She had earned Amara's trust, and with that trust came an opportunity to show the world what she was truly capable of. The night went on, and Sarah found herself surrounded by guests congratulating her on the success of the event. But amidst the celebration, her thoughts kept drifting back to Amara's words. This was just the beginning. As the final guests began to leave, Sarah caught sight of Amara once again, standing by the door with a faint smile on her face. Sarah approached her, her heart racing with excitement and gratitude. "You did well," Amara said softly, her eyes still sharp but warmer than before. "But remember, this is just one step. There's always more to prove." Sarah nodded, knowing that Amara's test was far from over. But for now, she had passed, and that was enough.